Okay, so this is the regulation track. So I'm going to talk about business privacy in the context of what I think is a very underrated success metric in the world of crypto and blockchain, which is not going to prison. I feel like I would not do well in prison. I feel like many of you would prefer not to go. So I'm going to talk a lot about sort of why privacy matters, how you make it work, and how you try to do this in a way that is regulatory compliant, because those are all good things. As I got a great introduction, I am the global blockchain leader at EY, and I'm also the chairman of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. So I will also confess, we're a bit of a EY. We have really kind of staked our reputation. This is our 10th year, believe it or not. We're going into our 10th year as a blockchain business. And for 10 years, we have been public blockchain focused and Ethereum focused. And so that's something I think that sort of sets us apart from a lot of other firms which have, frankly, tried to just tell people what they want to hear. Like, oh, yeah, it's a private blockchain. It's a great idea. No, it's not. I don't think so, at any rate. So let's talk about blockchain business privacy. But in particular, let's talk about it in the context of the history of running businesses. I personally am a huge fan of like the history of business. And if you know much about the history of business, and Germany is a great country for people who care about like things like manufacturing, you may know that back in the 1950s and the 1960s, the preeminent factory on Earth, the one that people said was like the greatest factory ever, was the River Rouge factory that Ford ran in Detroit. I mean, it is only a modest exaggeration to basically say dirt went in on one side of the factory and cars came out on the other. There was like a steel factory in there. There was like a rubber plant. There was like a tire factory, glass, everything. Like they made everything inside of that factory. And the number one issue inside of Ford in terms of how to run a great car business in the 1960s was how to do it inside of Ford. If you were to fast forward to today, ask yourself, what is the preeminent, most important, interesting factory on Earth? You would probably say the Foxconn iPhone assembly plant in Shenzhen. And the reason you would say that is that's basically where iPhones come from. And what's amazing about this is they do not make anything there. They do not make anything at all. Right? What they do is they assemble stuff that comes from all over the world, like literally hundreds of companies sending stuff, and they managed to do this in time to like flood the world with whatever the iPhone version is that's coming out this year. They coordinate, manage, and flood the world with literally millions of these devices in time for a major product launch. So this one, the success metric here, has nothing to do with Foxconn's ability to manage their own workforce. It's entirely secondary. Everything is about Apple's ability to manage literally hundreds of high-tech suppliers. I spent 15 years at IBM running the global electronics industry business unit, and I can tell you the lead time, the full lead time for a new chip is a minimum of 6 months. Right? If you really think about like silicon wafer starts through like processing and packaging, the truth is that it takes 6 months to coordinate the ramp up of like chip manufacturing, right? And it is, by the way, incredibly difficult. So what happened over a period of about 50 or 60 years was we went from this vertically integrated model where your success was entirely driven by your ability to manage your own business to a model where your success is largely driven by your ability to work effectively with literally hundreds of potentially thousands of other companies. And Apple is probably the best case example of this, but it's not really any different for Google or Samsung. None of these companies actually make in any substantial way all of their own product. Right? The closest thing we probably have to a vertically integrated kind of like smartphone manufacturer is Samsung, and even they are incredibly dependent on the entire ecosystem to drive their volume and participation. So when you look forward one step by that, right, everything about how we build stuff and make stuff in the modern world depends on cooperation across companies, and this is the one thing that really has not matured at all in decades. Right? If you were to go back to the 1970s, right, as I like to joke, is before the dawn of modern civilization, people were faxing stuff to each other, right? That's what they used to do. They fax purchase orders to each other. You want to get something quickly, you faxed it to somebody, you FedExed it. Does anybody know what EDI is? How many of you know what EDI is? That is amazing. EDI still today is the backbone of almost the entire global supply chain. EDI stands for Electronic Data Interchange, and it is basically business-to-business text messaging. Right? That's really what's just point-to-point messaging, and there are all these, it's just structured text messages, and there are literally hundreds of these like text message formats. There's one called an 856, which is a shipment notice. There's others that are like purchase orders, order templates. It's literally just point-to-point text messaging. Right? And in the good old days, and by the good old days I mean like the 1970s and 1980s, companies could charge you per character. Right? We live in a world of unlimited texting. Companies used to pay per character for these messages, right? And that was absolutely state of the art. And what's hilarious is this is still, 50 years later, this is still the #1 way in which we manage most business collaboration. The vast majority of global supply chain orders are delivered by text messages. If your company is super fancy, you send people PDFs, or maybe you have like a shared Google Sheet, right, for like your actual operational collaboration. But the truth is, like, business-to-business cooperation today is still extremely immature. And what's funny is, inside of the enterprise boundaries, we are really good at operational stuff, right? We tend to have, I mean, Germany is the home of SAP, right? It's all fully integrated, end-to-end process control, single enterprise telling everybody what to do. We have perfected the art of managing inside the four walls of the enterprise just in time for it to become largely irrelevant. Right? And instead, it's all about how you manage and work with other companies. And I think blockchain is a vastly better way to do this. Right? Instead of having point-to-point text messaging like, hey, I'd like to order 50,000 of these, and you're sending me back a message saying, OK, I may or may not deliver them, right? We can actually tokenize all the assets in the supply chain. Right? So if you think about a smartphone, you've got a chip, you've got like a CPU, you've got some memory chips, right? We can create digital tokens on chain for all of these, and we can move them through the supply chain as the product matures, right? So, you know, the raw materials or the core, you know, components go from their suppliers to the manufacturing hub, where they get combined into a phone or a computer, which gets transported into a warehouse, and so on. And blockchain does this so much better than any traditional system, right? Orders of magnitude better, and I'll give you a couple of examples. In this whole point-to-point world that we mostly still live in today, data doesn't really move between companies. What really happens is that companies recreate the data at every step of the way, right? When the manufacturing company receives a bunch of supply, they're not really moving the data about the supply. What they're doing is they're basically just recreating it. When you get a shipment of 1,000 CPUs, they're not really moving that data. They're just they're creating 1,000 CPUs in inventory. And by the way, there's no reconciliation. Right? I can create inventory anywhere in this process, and nobody has to deduct it. Now, the banking system is vastly more mature and more sophisticated in this respect. So if I want to give you money, it has to come out of my bank account, right, before it can appear in your account. Like, we have complete end-to-end reconciliation across the system. Because if I knew how to make money appear in your account without coming out of my bank account, I would be extremely rich and retired by now, because I would be making money magically appear in my own bank account. So blockchains are amazing because basically we can have end-to-end reconciliation in the supply chain or the business process for everything, absolutely everything. And so if you think about just a very traditional like supply chain, right, stuff here is moving from left to right, and we can have money tokens actually moving from right to left. And all of this can be governed by a set of smart contracts that represent the business agreements between companies. And this is vastly, vastly more efficient than traditional systems. How much more efficient, you might be wondering? The answer is you can basically run your business process 99% faster. That's not a typo. Like, we have proof working with clients that when you move from traditional business paper contracts or even traditional electronic contracts to blockchain-based smart contracts, you can run your process 99% faster. And you can do it with about 20 to 30% less inventory. Because if you are much more disciplined and accurate about the stuff that you have, you can run it much, much more efficiently. And it's worth just taking a moment to contemplate the size of the value proposition, because it's trillions and trillions of dollars, right? It's incredibly valuable. And by the way, absolutely none of it will work without privacy. And this is the big problem that we have in blockchain. People often ask me, especially at EY, like non-crypto people like Paul, I heard that like blockchain was going to be like good for business, but nobody's actually using it. Why not? And the answer is we don't have any privacy in this system, right? If you make crypto payments, there's no privacy in those payments today, right? Everybody can see who you're transacting with. Now, if it's just me sending you a one-time transaction, it's probably not all that noticeable. I can make it kind of, it's one small blip in a sea of stuff. But let's say you're a company like Apple or Google and you're transacting with Samsung or Foxconn, right? You're talking about tens of billions of dollars happening, with transactions that are happening probably thousands of times a year. That's going to be really easy for somebody to figure out. So we need privacy. And just to give you a sense of what kind of privacy we need, I think there's two very specific kinds of privacy that you need. First, you need privacy for your assets, transfers, and payments, right? Basically, every business agreement can be boiled. This is a picture of every single business agreement on earth. One party has money, the other party has stuff, and we are going to exchange money for the stuff under some kind of an agreement, right? We can tokenize the money, we can tokenize the stuff, and we can turn the agreement into a smart contract. It's all perfectly representable on a blockchain. Very importantly, we need privacy for the transfers and payments, and we also need privacy for the business rules around the contract. How many of you have ever negotiated like a corporate procurement agreement? We got a couple people here, right? So you know that if you can read the content of the business agreement, you've already deduced the most sensitive business secret of all. Because these agreements usually say company A is going to buy 1 million widgets from company B at $10 each, and if they buy more than 1 million widgets, then they get a 10% discount or a 15% discount. If I can read just the smart contract, I already know the most sensitive stuff about what your business is going to do, which is how many you roughly plan to buy and what you're paying for it. And by the way, how much you're paying, that's very sensitive, right? Even inside of companies like Samsung. Samsung sells millions of displays and memory chips to Apple. Samsung's own phone people don't know the price that Apple is paying for those chips and displays. Right? That's how compartmentalized and sensitive that kind of information is. So, at EY, we've been working on blockchain privacy since about 2017. We are, as I like to joke, currently 8 years into a project that I thought was going to take like 2 years. So we are slightly behind schedule, but I think we are closing in the answer. The short answer is like it turns out that blockchain privacy is way, way, way harder than I ever imagined it was going to be. And in the end, we've really ended up with two pieces in our approach. The first is a tool called Starlight. Starlight lets you make fully private smart contracts. It's a public domain, open source application. You can basically take pretty much any Solidity smart contract, and it will help you turn it into a zero-knowledge circuit, which is very cool. You don't have to be a software developer. You don't have to be a mathematician to do it. You just have to know how to make Solidity contracts and then mark them up a little bit. And this is a big deal. It's public domain. It's open source. Anyone can use it. It's fully EVM compatible. And it's quite handy. However, you can't, it's probably not a good idea to entirely use it on its own, because if you have two parties in a smart contract, even if it creates a zero-knowledge circuit, a little black box in which you can operate, the problem that you will have is that if I put in $10 and you put in 2 widgets, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that your average price per widget is $5 each, right? Like, that's very easy to reverse engineer. So Starlight allows you to build like very cool custom private black boxes, but you have to think very carefully about how much metadata you will leak if you're not careful. To help deal with that, we also created something called Nightfall. Nightfall is a large-scale ZK rollup that basically allows you to do transfers and payments in a large shared privacy pool at scale. So it's And Nightfall's got a couple of big advantages. Number one, it's a protocol layer privacy tool that encompasses a huge amount of participants, or is designed to encompass a huge amount of participants in the system. We are currently on version 4, and in the next month or two, you will see some announcements about blockchain networks that are implementing Nightfall as a privacy layer on top of their mainnet, or their layer 2. So, and this is also public domain open source code contributed by EY. So ideally, the ideal future state for us is that you'll be able to do high volume, low cost transactions in an integrated privacy layer. And when you want to have a complex business logic between the networks, or between applications, or you want to do something special, you'll be able to write custom business logic using Starlight. Right? And within the next 18 months, our roadmap calls for full composability and interoperability between the two. So you'll basically be able to have fully complete, complex business logic across multiple companies under privacy at all times. That's the end state goal. And once you get to that point, you can not just model any business agreement between two companies, you can build and run any level of like blockchain business ecosystem fully under privacy on a public blockchain network, right? And our big priority now is to complete the interoperability of these, the composability of these between these two, and then to continuously drive down the cost per transaction so that this becomes accessible to ever less costly models. This is going to be like transactions here now are at about 5 to 6 cents. And these are more like 25 cents to $8, depending on how much gas you're going to consume. So enterprise privacy is hard because it's not just that these solutions are technically complex, but they also have quite a lot of stuff that consumers care about and a lot of businesses frankly don't. Or other way around. Businesses care about, the consumers don't. Consumers don't care about a lot of complex logic. They don't do a lot of high volume repeat transactions. They don't have multi-party business networks. These are all things that businesses care about. And first and foremost, businesses care about regulatory compliance. This is the number one priority for them, right? To get to regulatory compliance, we spent a lot of time thinking about this. And in the end, what we decided to do was to make Nightfall a confidential but not an anonymous system. So how does Nightfall work? It basically creates this like giant black space where people from the outside cannot see in using zero knowledge proofs, right? So you can do all of this kind of on a public chain, but very importantly, you cannot do this anonymously. You have to have some kind of enterprise identity or business identity or user identity certificate in order to use Nightfall. The default for us is something called an X.509. It's another standard from the ancient times, but it's very useful. It's considered like a business identity certificate. They're issued by SSL companies, right? But it is required that you, at least the way we have written it, you cannot use it without some form of identity. And this kind of puts us in an interesting position, right? If you think about and you can tell I'm a former consultant because I love my 2-axis charts, right? If you think about the world of identified versus anonymous and private versus public, right? Your standard Ethereum is a pseudonymous but public system, right? You get an ID, but it's not your name, and everything is public. If you're like me and you identify yourself by buying yourself an ENS domain and dropping it in your wallet, you make yourself visible to everybody, right? So you're identified in public. That's fine for showing off your NFT collection, not so good for your business transactions. Private and anonymous. This category is called the how to go to prison category, okay? And there are people, not me, who passionately believe that this should be something. And I will say, I do not believe that writing software should itself be a crime, right? And I'm happy to say the US courts have, over the last year or so, been very, very assertive in saying you can sanction people for engaging in criminal activity. You cannot sanction somebody just for writing software. There are lots and lots of legitimate uses for this software, right? And our focus at EY is what I would say private but identified, right? So you can use Nightfall, and it provides you with an extremely robust level of privacy, but it does require that you be identified as which company is doing this. So the regulators can look at the transactions, money going in or money coming out, and basically come to you and saying, what is it that you're actually doing? One of the cool things about something like Nightfall is if the regulators ask you, and they have the right to ask you that, and you answer, not only can you answer them, but also you can prove mathematically that the information you gave them is truthful, which is kind of a plus. Beyond regulatory compliance, there's 4 things that are really important. The first is scalability, right? This has to be cheap at a very, very large scale, right? My own goal is that we need to get to 1, possibly 2 orders of magnitude cheaper. So right now, at Nightfall for us is about 5 cents per transaction. I would like us to be closer to 0.5 cent or less. Programmability, right? The big value proposition of blockchain is full programmability, right? You know, if we just wanted payments, we can have them, right? The value proposition is this ability to make stuff happen automatically, to implement smart contracts at scale. Composability, right? I want to build complex ecosystems across lots of business parties. Companies want to be on chain and transact with multiple business partners, right? The bad old days where everybody has a separate business relationship with everybody else and we all have to log into completely different proprietary networks in order to do that business collaboration, right? A much better option is that we can all use a single digital environment and compose between it. And then lastly, permanence. This is something that I didn't realize how important it was until fairly recently. But if you care about your privacy, your tokens have to go into a privacy environment, you put them in, and you keep them there. Everything runs in the dark. So if you look at all these other systems that exist today, you know, Zcash, Tornado Cash, et cetera, they run like fancy mixers. You put stuff in, and you hope that nobody can make a good connection to what you take out. Let me take a slide from this morning's presentation by Chainalysis and disabuse you of this, right? You make enough transactions, they will figure out who you are and where the money is going, right? And this kind of blew my mind. I knew it's theoretically possible if you have enough transactions that you can basically de-obfuscate a lot of these mixers. What Chainalysis has shown me in their presentation this morning is this is a reality. And it's a reality today for criminals that they can de-obfuscate where your money is going. But trust me, your competition, if you're a large company and you're doing thousands of transactions with key suppliers, they can do this to you too, right? So you will see lots of companies out there promising like hybrid solutions, a little bit of ZK mixer style capability for their private payments, right? That is not good enough, not by a long shot. If you make any kind of payments in volume and you have stuff going into privacy and coming out of privacy, the metadata that you leak at the entry point and the exit point will destroy you, right? It will share with everybody everything that you are doing. There is, for serious companies who care about their privacy, there is only one option going forward, which is to put it in and keep it there forever. How many minutes do I have left? 2 minutes. All righty. Where are we today? So we are past the prototype stage. We are into what I would call the customized high-value usage stage, which is we've got products, we've got capabilities, we have early-stage clients. We're going to see the first deployments of Nightfall as a layer 3 network in the Ethereum ecosystem. Announcements coming so soon. I'm terribly excited, and I just can't tell you. But it's happening. And I think we're 18, 24, 36 months from what I would call like general purpose, everything works and it's massively scalable and all you have to do is put it to work. But we are there. It's been quite a journey. You know, we started in 2017. I was there at DevCon in Prague when we showed our prototype. Only $100 per transaction. And this was at a time when ETH was $265. We needed 2 complete blocks of the Ethereum blockchain to execute a single transaction. We've improved a lot, right? Basically more than 1,000x in terms of ZK performance, right? So zero knowledge has been slow and painful, but it's also been a little bit surprising at how much improvement has come over the last few years. I am hopeful that if we achieve another 1,000x performance in the next like 3 or 4 years, doing transactions on-chain under privacy will be a piece of cake and ridiculously cheap. A little bit of shameless advertising for EY. We are absolutely the most Ethereum-aligned company you can find out there, and I'm the chairman of the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance. I wrote a nice little book, which the US government says is safe and effective for falling asleep when you're unable to do so. And I'm friends with Vitalik, but I think, and we are, at EY, we are, I would say, by far the most technically capable. We are the only big company on earth that is doing like hardcore blockchain engineering. Nobody else is left in this space. Everybody else gave it up during the last crypto winter. We are still alive. And before I go, thank you very much. If you would like it, you can have a free NFT, which is not quite as good as a PUB, but I call it Proof of Paul. That's it. Thank you.